I still remember the smell of that morning coffee brewing, sunlight slipping through the tall glass windows of my office, and the faint hum of the city below. Everything felt perfect, or at least I thought it was. Back then, I believed life had finally rewarded me for years of struggle. My name is Aaron Blake, and I built my company, Blake Enterprises, from nothing. Every wall in that office held a story of sleepless nights and risks that could have ended me. But I survived. I succeeded. And I told myself now I could finally live. I had a fiancée, Leila Monroe. The woman everyone said was made for me. Beautiful, graceful, and always smiling when the cameras were around. When she looked at me, I saw a future, a home, a family, peace. Or maybe I just wanted to see that. Then there was my stepsister, Vanessa. We weren't close growing up, but we tried to be civil. Our father, Charles Blake, had remarried after my mother passed. Vanessa was from that marriage. She was sharp, clever, too clever sometimes. She had a way of saying kind things with eyes that said something else entirely, but I never paid much attention to it. I thought jealousy was normal in families. My father was a different story. Charles Blake, a man who could turn warmth into ice with a single look. Once, he was my hero. He taught me how to fight, how to work, how to never give up. But after I built my own empire, he started treating me like competition instead of a son. Still, I kept my respect for him, because that's what good sons do, right? At that time, everything seemed stable. Leila was planning our wedding. Vanessa had just joined the company's marketing division, and my father had agreed to attend the ceremony, something I honestly didn't expect. I thought maybe things were finally healing, but beneath all that, cracks had already started forming. Small things. Little details. A whisper I ignored. A text message Leila quickly deleted when I walked into the room. The way Vanessa smiled whenever she mentioned my fiancé's name. Or how my father suddenly became interested in the company's finances again, asking for reports he hadn't cared about in years. I brushed it off, because when you love people, you don't look for reasons to doubt them. You look for reasons to believe them. One evening, after a long meeting, I came home to find Leila sitting by the balcony, staring into the distance. She looked lost, almost guilty. "Everything okay?" I asked, walking up behind her. She turned, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Wedding stress, you know." I nodded, kissed her forehead, and believed her, because she was my peace. Or so I thought. That night, as I fell asleep beside her, I felt her hand gently slide away from mine. I didn't know then. That was the first time she started pulling away. Not physically, but emotionally. And the more I'd try to hold her close, the faster she'd slip through my fingers. Looking back now, I realized that peace I felt wasn't peace at all. It was silence before the thunder. And soon, that silence would break. The following weeks were a blur of business meetings, wedding preparations, and quiet dinners that felt emptier each day. I didn't notice the shift at first, how smiles around me grew thinner, how laughter began to feel forced. I thought it was just stress. After all, planning a wedding while running a company isn't easy. But deep down, something was changing. Vanessa had started spending more time in my office. She claimed it was for marketing updates, but most of the time, her conversations drifted to personal topics. "You trust people too easily, Aaron," she said one afternoon, leaning on my desk with that smug half-smile. I glanced up from my laptop. "That's not a weakness." She shrugged. "Maybe not. Until it is." Her tone carried something sharp, a hidden meaning I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off, trying to focus on my work, but her words lingered. That evening, I found Leila and Vanessa chatting in the living room. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. Laughing, whispering, sharing glances that made me pause at the door. When they saw me, the laughter stopped, replaced by polite smiles. "Oh, Aaron," Leila said softly, "Vanessa was just telling me about your childhood. You never told me how mischievous you were." Vanessa chuckled, sipping her wine. He was always the golden boy. Perfect grades, perfect manners. I guess some things never change. I smiled faintly, but inside I felt a strange discomfort. There was a hint of mockery in her tone, something bitter hidden behind her words. Later that night, when Vanessa left, I asked Leila, "You two seem close suddenly." She looked surprised. "Is that a problem?" "Of course not," I said, forcing a smile. "It's just unexpected." She laughed softly, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Don't overthink everything, Aaron. You worry too much." But I did. I always did. especially when the people I loved started acting differently. Over the next few days, little things began to pile up. Vanessa started suggesting changes in the company, bold ones, that didn't make sense. She'd phrase them as helpful advice, but I knew her too well. Then, one day, my father called me into his office. His tone was colder than usual. "Aaron," he said, without looking up from his desk, "I've been reviewing your recent financial decisions." I frowned. "Since when do you review my company's finances?" He looked up sharply. "Since it carries my family name." I bit back my frustration. "With all due respect, Father, Blake Enterprises is independent now. You stepped down years ago." His eyes narrowed. "And maybe that was a mistake." That conversation ended with tension thick enough to choke on. As I walked out, I noticed Vanessa standing by the door, pretending to scroll through her phone, but clearly listening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every interaction in my head: Vanessa's comments, my father's sudden interest, and Lila's distance. They were small things, but together they formed a pattern. One evening, while Lila was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the table. Normally, I'd ignore it, but this time, the name flashing on the screen made my heart skip. "Vanessa." I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The sound of betrayal doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it's in the silence that follows. When Lila came out, wrapped in her robe, she saw me staring at her phone. Her smile faltered for just a second before she hid it behind a calm expression. "Work message," she said quickly. "Vanessa's helping with the wedding list." I nodded slowly. Of course, but deep down, I knew something was off. The two people who never got along before were suddenly inseparable. My father, who once ignored my business, was suddenly interested again. And I, the man who thought he could read people, was completely blind. Something dark was growing around me. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see it yet, and soon it would show its face. Days turned into weeks, and that uneasy feeling inside me refused to fade. I tried to bury myself in work, convincing myself that business would distract me. But no matter how busy I was, my mind always drifted back to one thought. Lila was different lately. She no longer called me during the day like she used to. Our late-night talks faded into silence. When I asked about the wedding plans, she always said, "Don't worry, I've got it all handled." One evening, I decided to surprise her. She had told me she was meeting Vanessa to finalize the guest list at a restaurant downtown. So, after wrapping up early at the office, I drove there quietly. The restaurant was dimly lit, classy, Lila's favorite kind of place. I scanned the tables, expecting to see her with Vanessa, laughing, maybe sipping coffee. But what I saw instead froze me. Lila wasn't sitting with Vanessa. She was sitting with my father. They were deep in conversation, leaning close. My father's expression was serious, but hers was cold, sharp, confident, like she wasn't talking to her future father-in-law, but to a partner. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, hidden behind the glass window, watching the woman I loved, the woman I was about to marry, smile at the man who had raised me. When I drove away that night, I couldn't even feel anger, just emptiness, a silence inside me so deep that it almost drowned me. Later, when I got home, Lila arrived a few minutes after me. She looked surprised. "You're home early." I tried to keep my voice steady. "So are you. How was your meeting with Vanessa?" She blinked, just for a second. That small hesitation that told me she was searching for a lie. "Good," she said finally. "We got a lot done." I nodded. "I'm sure you did." She walked past me, heading straight to the bedroom. No hug, no kiss. Just distance. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the city lights. Every success, every dream I had worked for, suddenly felt meaningless. Because what's the point of building an empire if the people you've built it for are secretly tearing it down? The next morning, Vanessa came into my office, cheerful as always. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "You and Lila meeting the investors." I frowned. "What investors?" Her smile faltered. I thought Lila mentioned it. She said, "Your father arranged something for the company expansion." I stared at her. "Vanessa, I never approved any expansion." She froze. Oh, that one word told me everything. There was something happening, a deal, a plan, and I was the last to know. That evening, I went through my business emails. Buried deep in the archive was a thread I'd never seen before. Documents, proposals, and signatures that weren't mine. Someone had been using my name, my digital ID to authorize transactions. When I looked at the signature line, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just one signature. It was two. Charles Blake and Lila Monroe. They were using my company, my life's work, to push a private deal behind my back. For the first time in years, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through the files, realizing just how deep it went. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a takeover. I stared at Lila's name on those documents for a long time. The woman I trusted with my heart had just sold my future. That night, when she walked into our home, I didn't say a word. I just watched her. Every smile, every gesture, every "I love you" that came out of her mouth. Now it all sounded rehearsed. She had fooled me perfectly. But that's the thing about lies. No matter how beautiful they are, they always fall apart in the end. And I promised myself, when hers fell apart, I'd make sure everyone saw the truth behind her smile. I barely slept that night. I sat by the window until sunrise, watching the city wake up while my world fell apart. The truth was right there in front of me, cold and sharp, and yet part of me still wanted to believe it wasn't real. That maybe I'd misunderstood something, that maybe she wasn't capable of it. But denial is the slowest poison, and I'd already taken too much of it. The next morning, I went to the office earlier than anyone. I opened the company's financial system and pulled every document I could find. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. Hidden accounts, fake contracts, funds moved without authorization. All of it leading back to my father's approval and Lila's signature. Vanessa's name appeared too, but indirectly, small mentions. Project coordination, liaison for internal affairs. She was the bridge between them, the perfect messenger. By noon, I knew the truth. They were planning to merge Blake Enterprises into another firm, one owned by my father and registered under Lila's name. The move would leave me with nothing, not even the rights to my own company. And the wedding? That was just the final step, the public image of a perfect family sealing the deal. I felt something inside me snap. Not anger, not yet, but something colder, something that whispered, enough. That evening, I went home, pretending nothing had changed. Lila was already there, dressed elegantly, phone in hand, smiling as if she had nothing to hide. "How was work?" she asked. "Busy," I replied. "Yours?" She hesitated, just finalizing wedding things. I walked closer, looked her straight in the eyes, and said softly, "I saw you with my father." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you at the restaurant," I continued. "I also saw the documents, the deals, the signatures." For a moment, the mask cracked. Then, just as quickly, she forced a smile. "Aaron, you're overreacting. It's a misunderstanding." I stared at her, really stared. "Don't lie." "Not anymore." Her silence said everything. She looked down, then away, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to find out this way." That single sentence felt like a blade. I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing left to feel. "So it's true," I said. "You, my father, and Vanessa. All of you." Lila's voice trembled slightly. "It's business, Aaron. Your father, he said you'd understand." "Understand?" I repeated. "You betrayed me. You lied to me every day, and you want me to understand?" Tears filled her eyes, but I saw no guilt there, only fear. Fear of what would happen now that her secret was out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Tell me one thing, Lila. Did you ever love me? Even once?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. No answer came, and that silence was all the answer I needed. She grabbed her bag and left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed through the house. Final, heavy, cold. I stood there, surrounded by everything I'd built, realizing how easily trust can crumble. The next morning, my father called. "I heard you confronted Lila," he said, calm as ever. "You knew," I replied quietly. "I let it," he corrected, "because you were too naive to run this empire alone." I felt the world tilt for a second. "You destroyed your own son's future," I said. He chuckled softly. "No, Aaron. I protected our name. You were turning it into something weak. Emotionally. You let love blind you. I couldn't let that happen." And then he hung up. That was the moment I realized something important. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people who taught you how to trust in the first place. That evening, I went to my office one last time. I stood in front of the massive glass wall, looking out over the city I'd once ruled. My father, my fiancée, and my stepsister had taken everything. But they made one mistake. They left me standing. And that's when I decided I wouldn't break. I'd rise. I'd make them regret the day they underestimated me. Not with anger, not with violence, but with a plan so perfect it would end them exactly the way they tried to end me. For days after the call with my father, I moved through the world like a man wearing someone else's face. To everyone else, I was the same calm Aaron Blake, polite emails, measured meetings, the facade of a man in control. Inside, a storm was building. I had been stripped of everything, but I still had one thing they could never touch: the truth. The first step was simple. Find proof. Not a guess, not a hunch, but names, dates, bank transfers, signatures. A chain that would show exactly how they planned to steal what I'd built. I locked my office door, sat down at the same desk where I had signed my first deed, and began to search. I started with the accounts. It didn't take long to find the hidden ledgers cleverly named shell entries tucked among legitimate vendor payments. Someone had taken care to mask them, but no one knows the inside of a system like the founder. Small inconsistencies jumped out at me. Rounding errors, duplicate invoice numbers, times when files were accessed late at night. I traced transfers to a company registration I had never heard of, one that listed Lila as a director and had my father's silent partner as the ultimate beneficiary. Vanessa's messages were the next piece. She'd always kept a careful digital footprint, a mix of flirty texts, work emails, and vague messages meant to be plausible if anyone ever glanced. But she'd slipped. A careless forwarded memo, a draft she thought she deleted. And suddenly, there were screenshots of conversations where she coordinated meetings, lists of names, and instructions on how to present false projections to the board. I printed everything, page after page. The reality of their betrayal grew heavier in my hands. Photocopies, bank statements, email chains, contracts. I labeled folders and stacked them like a small, undeniable mountain. For the first time since that meal at the restaurant, I felt something that wasn't just anger. It was clarity. Clarity required allies. I called one person I trusted in the legal world, a lawyer I had once helped when his startup nearly collapsed. He owed me nothing now, but when I explained what I'd found, his voice hardened. We'll need forensic analysts. We'll need to lock accounts. And Aaron, don't confront them yet. Let the evidence do the work. That suited me. I wanted the truth to be what struck them, not my rage. We moved quietly. Forensic accountants traced the shell company's money flow and found an offshore trail that looped back through intermediaries linked to my father's trusted network. Every transfer had a purpose: to make the merger look like a growth strategy, to make me seem incompetent, to leave me legally out of the equation. The more we found, the more outrageous it sounded. And yet each page proved the others were true, but evidence alone wasn't enough. Even when people are caught on paper, they can lie with their mouths and manipulate with charm. I needed a way to make the world, the board, the investors, the press, my employees, see the betrayal all at once. I needed a stage. The wedding gave me the stage I never wanted. They had planned it as the final proof of family unity. Photographs, speeches, an expensive venue filled with people who praised our name. They wanted public trust to cover up private theft. I decided to turn the celebration inside out. I could have gone to the press. I could have filed a lawsuit immediately and let lawyers throttle the deal in court. But I wanted them to feel the humiliation of exposure, the slow, inevitable crumbling of the image they'd built. I wanted each guest to realize that every smile they'd seen was part of a lie. I found another weakness: pride. Charles Blake loved the story of a powerful, united family more than any bank account. Lila thrived on attention and social approval. Vanessa wanted recognition. They'd already arranged for a formal announcement at the wedding. The merger would be unveiled as a brilliant step for the family. Perfect. On the day before the ceremony, I asked to see Lila. She came composed as ever, her voice dripping concern as if she still cared. I let her talk, let her smooth words roll over me. She said the same rehearsed lines. "We'll be stronger together. Think of legacy. You know I love you." I let her think she had me fooled. I filmed our conversation on a hidden device, not for blackmail, It was only backup. Proof had a way of multiplying. That night, under the quiet hum of the city lights, I walked through the empty hall where the wedding would be held. Imagine the shock on their faces when everything they'd planned to reveal became the thing that destroyed them. I rehearsed the reveal in my head, the moment I would stand up, the files I would present, the silence that would follow. The worst thing for them would not be legal consequences alone. It would be the collapse of the image they believed would protect them. I designed the exposure to be surgical. At the ceremony, there would be a slideshow, the kind families use to endearing effect, pictures of childhood and triumphs. My team had a copy of the event feed. I arranged for a single slide, strategically placed to show the chain of emails and the contract excerpts. They would play between a toast and a video montage, when attention would be at its highest and the cameras would be rolling. But I couldn't risk the tech team being tipped off. So I worked with my IT head, someone I had promoted when trust mattered, and together we embedded the files in the presentation as if they were personal pictures. The slideshow would look innocent to anyone skimming, but when a slide enlarged, the text would be legible: signatures, bank details, dates matching the bank transfers. I also made copies for the board and the major investors, slipped into sealed envelopes, and handed 2 trusted allies scheduled to speak that night. No lawyer, no courtroom, just the truth in front of everyone who mattered. The last piece was personal Vanessa. I needed her to see herself exposed, not merely hear it. I arranged for the wedding photographer to include a candid photo that showed her at the restaurant conversation with Leela and my father. It was small, almost imperceptible, but when contrasted with the documents, it would look damning. On the morning of the wedding, I sat alone in the guest suite, wearing a suit that suddenly felt like armor. The rituals of the day went on around me: petals, music, laughter. I watched Vanessa from across the room. She looked triumphant, a woman who believed she'd won. My father joked with investors as if the world bowed at his will. Leela walked by with that practiced smile, unaware the stage was about to shift. When the slideshow began, no one expected anything. They had seen slides before. They had a script to follow. Glasses were raised and the music swelled. The screen showed baby pictures, travel photos, the usual curated warmth. Then, without warning, a contract appeared. A bank transfer trace. The camera caught the bride's hand, the groom's smile, and then a close-up of my father's signature. Gasps rose like a wave. I watched Vanessa go pale. Lila froze as if someone had pressed pause on her life. My father's face turned from proud to panicked in an instant. In the soft light of the hall, the false veneer flaked away. Voices rose, questions spilled, investors whispered, guests murmured. I stood up slowly, feeling the room tilt into silence. I took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady. "You've all been invited here today to witness a marriage and a partnership. But partnerships should be built on truth. I'd like to share something with you." I laid the stacks of documents on the lectern and, one by one, showed them to the audience. Contracts, bank transfers, email chains. The same slideshow played on the screen above, magnifying each damning piece. Cameras zoomed in. Phones recorded. People who once smiled now had questions they could not swallow. My father made a move. Toward me, anger and betrayal bleeding into one another. He whispered, "You're ruining us." But when every investor and board member had pages that bore his name, his words lost weight. Vanessa lunged for a response that would explain everything away, but the photographer had already framed the candid shot. There was no room left for her practiced lies. Lila tried to laugh it off, remarkable composure cracking for the first time. Her eyes searched mine, pleading, but there was no pity left to give. The rest of the night dissolved into chaos. Some guests left quietly, others demanded explanations. Reporters, because someone always records everything now, had snippets that would spread within hours. My father's trusted allies retreated the way people do when a foundation shows a crack they cannot mend. As the room emptied, I felt a strange sense of calm. The damage I wanted to inflict had been done. The image that had protected them was gone. Their world, built on false unity and secret deals, had been taken in broad daylight. But exposing the theft was only the middle of the plan. Full revenge demanded more than humiliation. It demanded justice, legal, financial, irrevocable. I had made them fall. I still had to ensure they couldn't climb back up. I walked out into the night, the city lights distant and indifferent. The storm I had held inside finally broke, but not in the way I once imagined. It was not loud or vengeful. It was precise, a collapse engineered by evidence and patience. As I stood there, I knew the next moves would be harder. Lawsuits, forensics, family fractures bleeding onto public pages. People would take sides. Things I loved would be damaged in the crossfire. Revenge always has cost, but for the first time since the first hint of betrayal, I felt in control. They had stolen a life from me. Now I would take back everything, piece by piece. They taught me to measure success by the numbers on a balance sheet. Profit, loss, equity. But they never taught me how to measure the weight of betrayal. I learned that quickly when the room emptied after the wedding and the cameras stopped blinking. The first wave of shock had passed. Now came the long, slow work of making that shock permanent. I started with the legal pieces my lawyer insisted on. We filed emergency injunctions to freeze the accounts tied to the shell companies. The courts moved faster than I expected. Perhaps the evidence was cleaner than I knew. Or perhaps the judge simply understood the ugliness of a son's legacy being stolen. Either way, the transfers were halted. Offices connected to the deal were locked down. Men in suits who once smiled at my father's jokes stopped answering his calls. Freezing their money wasn't enough. I needed to remove their masks of respectability. My team and I began contacting key investors, one by one, with a full packet, signed contracts, forensics reports, email chains. I didn't speak in anger. I spoke in facts, crisp, cold, undeniable. People who had trusted their positions and reputations suddenly had their own money at risk. They listened. Some investors withdrew support quietly, choosing to distance themselves from the scandal. Others demanded immediate board meetings and audits. A few, the ones who had long suspected Charles's hunger, called me with a tone I hadn't heard before. Relief mixed with regret. Relief that someone had finally put an end to what they'd always known was coming. Regret that it had to be my life torn apart for the truth to come out. Vanessa tried damage control. She posted messages about family misunderstandings, about loyalty and learning. Her social media read like therapy sessions for the public, heartfelt, vague, and useless. The real blow came when her business partners began to receive copies of the emails, where she orchestrated meetings and coached Leela on how to frame the merger. Contracts were rescinded, partnerships evaporated, and invitations that once opened doors now bounced back with polite refusals. Lila's world imploded differently. Where Vanessa faced professional consequences, Lila faced the cruelty of social truth. The charity boards that once welcomed her now asked for formal explanations. Her high society friends, the ones who attended galas and auctions with her, sent cautious texts, their faces suddenly lined with doubt. She was removed from committees, uninvited from events, and deserted with the speed of people who never imagined standing beside a scandal. And my father, Charles, was the hardest part. He owned his arrogance like armor. But armor breaks when the blows are aimed precisely. The audits revealed more than the merger scheme. There were expenses tied to vanity projects, payments to consultants with suspicious links, and a history of using family capital as his personal slush fund. The board he once controlled convened emergency sessions. Men who had followed him out of loyalty now saw the cost of staying. I did not celebrate when each of them faced consequences. There was a small, private moment of satisfaction, the kind that comes when truth meets consequence, but celebration felt wrong. This was family we were tearing down, not strangers. I had to remind myself of that often. Revenge is not a party. It's a necessary cruelty when justice refuses to be simple. There were nights I lay awake, thinking about how everything I loved, my home, my routine, the idea of a family had been used as weapons against me. I thought of the long hours of work, the small victories, the faces of employees who trusted in my leadership. My purpose shifted from revenge alone to protection. I wanted to ensure what I built could not be stolen again. So while the outside world watched Charles and his allies fall, I rebuilt the company's defenses. New board members, tightened controls, transparent reporting. I invited auditors I trusted and set up systems that could not be bypassed by anyone, father or fiancé included. But systems can be repaired faster than hearts. Vanessa called me one night, voice raw. "Aaron," she said, "you don't have to destroy everyone. I listened to the regret in her voice and thought about the years we'd wasted pretending. She offered no apologies that felt real. Instead, she spoke about fear, how she felt overlooked as a child, how success always belonged to me. Her words were a confession, but confessions without change are just noise. I told her nothing. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. Leela tried a different tactic. She sought me out, requesting a private meeting in a cafe that smelled of coffee and old paper. She sat across from me, makeup barely hiding the strain. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Her apology looked practiced, as if she had rehearsed the cadence to make it sound sincere.